The deputy's radio crackled in the hallway outside my dining room, and my mother-in-law was still smiling. Smiling, while two officers stood near her foyer, and my husband stared at the floor like he'd never quite seen me before. 20 minutes earlier, Carol had pressed a phone into my hand and told me to talk to the doctor on the other end, said I sounded confused, said I needed rest, said it was for my own good. I knew exactly what she was building. I'd known for 6 weeks. So when she made that call in front of everyone and said the word crisis into the receiver, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my bag, set a manila folder down on the table next to the untouched pot roast, and asked her one question. Carol, do you know what a notary actually checks for? The room went quiet. And that was the moment everything she'd spent a year building started to come apart in front of her. But what happened next, nobody at that table could have prepared for. My name doesn't matter as much as the company I built, so I'll just call myself Mara. I grew up outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, the kind of house where the furnace broke every winter and my mother fixed it herself rather than call anyone. She drafted blueprints for a local engineering firm, and by the time I was 12, I could read a structural plan better than most grown men on the crew. I studied civil engineering at Oklahoma State, worked inspection jobs through 2 recessions, and at 28 opened Callaway Structural Consulting out of a spare bedroom with 1 laptop and a truck I'd bought used. 9 years later, we had 19 employees and contracts inspecting bridges and commercial buildings across 4 counties. I was proud of every bolt of it because no one had handed me a single piece. I met Derek Lansing at a county infrastructure conference of all places. He worked in his family's winery business and asked smart, specific questions about load tolerances instead of glazing over the way most people did. We dated 2 years before he brought me home to meet his mother, Carol, who ran Lansing Cellars the way a general runs a war room, every conversation a small negotiation, every compliment a soft opening move. Carol welcomed me with open arms literally the first night. She held my face in her hands at the door and told me I was exactly what this family needed. It felt wonderful. It should also have worried me, because people don't usually decide that fast unless they've already done the math. Derek's sister, Holly, ran the tasting room and managed the winery's social media. She was warm in front of Carol and several degrees cooler the moment Carol left a room. I noticed. I filed it away the same way I'd file a hairline crack in a foundation. Not urgent yet, but worth watching. What I didn't know was that Lansing Cellars was quietly drowning. 3 bad harvests, a renovation loan that had ballooned, a roof repair Carol kept delaying, because admitting the problem meant admitting she'd mismanaged 30 years of her late husband's legacy. What I also didn't know was that Carol had decided, somewhere in that first warm hug, that my company's cash flow was the answer to her problem. She just needed time, a reason, and a signature on something I hadn't read carefully enough. And here's the part that nobody at that dinner table understood yet. The first request came 8 months after the wedding, over lunch, at a bistro Carol liked, because the manager always sat her by the window. She set her fork down and told me she'd been thinking the family had a trust, Lanson Family Holdings, and it would simplify things, protect everyone if my consulting firm's accounts were folded in for tax efficiency. I told her gently that I'd built the company before I married Derek and intended to keep it separate. Her smile didn't move. Something behind it did. Of course, dear, she said. Just something to think about. That night, doing dishes, Derek told me not to make it weird. Mom was just trying to help, he said. She understood finances better than people gave her credit for. I told him no meant no. He went quiet in a way I'd come to recognize, a kind of internal tug of war I could feel even when I couldn't see it. 3 weeks later, I found a $4,000 transfer out of our joint account that I hadn't authorized. Derek said it was a short-term bridge for the winery's insurance premium, that Carol would pay it back. She didn't. When I asked him to agree to no further transfers without both of us signing off, he said fine, and 22 days later, another transfer went through while I was on a job site, 3 hours away. I moved my business deposits to a separate bank that week. He didn't notice for almost a month. Then came the barbecue in July, the whole family on the back patio, Holly talking about a new event planning venture she swore she had a real eye for. I offered contacts, genuinely, and watched her smile go thin. Later, getting ice, I overheard her on the phone in the laundry room. She acts like she's the only one who ever built anything, she said. Try doing it when your own mother won't stop comparing you to the golden daughter in law. I stood there a moment, then walked back outside without the ice. It stung. It also told me something useful. Carol wasn't managing one relationship. She was running all of us against each other and calling it love. The certified letter arrived in September, a property lien on the tasting room building, nearly $200,000 in unpaid taxes, 3 years overdue. When I sat Derek down with it, he finally admitted what Carol had hidden from everyone, even her own accountant. The winery was close to $250,000 in the hole. That evening, Carol called, warm as ever. We're family, Mara. Family helps family. Just to bridge loan, 6 months until spring sales. I said no, clearly and finally. A long pause on the line. Then, I see. We'll find another way, in a voice so calm it should have scared me more than it did. It was a promise. I just didn't know yet what shape it would take. The truth had been sitting in plain sight the whole time, and when it finally surfaced, it didn't look anything like what I expected. Derek's gym bag sat on the hallway bench the way it always did. I was looking for a charging cable he borrowed, and instead my hand found a folded document tucked behind his wallet. A spousal consent and signature authorization form, giving Derek the right to sign on every account at Callaway Structural Consulting, dated 4 months earlier, notarized by a name I didn't recognize, and signed at the bottom with my name in handwriting that wasn't mine. I'd signed my own name on permits, contracts, and licensing boards for 9 years. I know the slope of my own letters, the way an inspector knows the grain of a beam. This wasn't mine. I photographed every page and put the folder back exactly where I found it. That night, I lay next to a man I'd trusted for 3 years, and I genuinely didn't know anymore whether he was a participant or just a tool. A week later, my friend Renee, a paralegal I'd known since college, called me with something stranger. A woman claiming to be from my doctor's office had phoned Renee's firm, asking whether I'd ever shown signs of anxiety or cognitive confusion. Information no doctor's office would ever request through a law firm. Renee flagged it immediately. Mara, she said, someone is building a file on you, not a medical file, a narrative. I started noticing small things I'd been too tired to register before. Derek asking, out of nowhere, how decisions got made if I were ever unable to function. Carol mentioning, twice in 1 month, how stress could make a person not quite themselves. A neighbor casually asked whether she'd seen me acting erratic lately. Carol had asked her the same thing first. It wasn't poison. It wasn't a hospital bed. It was quieter than that, and in some ways colder. Carol wasn't trying to make me sick. She was trying to make me look unstable, on paper, in front of witnesses, so that if she ever needed a doctor or a judge to believe Derek should be making decisions for me, the groundwork would already exist. I found an attorney named June Okafor through the State Bar referral line, independent, no ties to the Lansings, specializing in business succession and family fraud. I brought her the forged authorization, the strange calls to Renee's firm, and the pattern of transfers. She didn't blink. You have forgery, she said, and you have the beginning of a staged incapacity claim. We move now, or we move after it's already happened to you. Within a week, June had restructured Callaway Structural's ownership documents, so Derek had no signing authority anywhere, filed a formal forgery challenge with the county clerk so the fake authorization couldn't be used quietly, and helped me set up something simple but effective, a small recorder I kept in my bag, and a standing instruction that if I ever went silent for more than a few hours during a trancing family gathering, she'd assume the worst and act. I went back to family dinners like nothing had changed. I smiled at Carol's stories. I just stopped eating anything I hadn't watched her cook from the start, and I never let my phone out of reach again. I finally understood why everything about that family had started to feel like a performance. Part 5. The moment of truth. The dinner where it finally happened was supposed to be ordinary. Derek's birthday. The whole family at the main house. Carol's pot roast. Candles she'd lit specifically because she said the lighting was better for photos. Halfway through dessert, she set her fork down and looked at me with theatrical concern. Mara, honey, you've seemed so foggy lately. Derek told me you forgot the Henderson inspection last week. I really think you should talk to someone. I hadn't forgotten anything. The Henderson inspection had been rescheduled by the client, not me, and Derek knew it, but I understood, right then, exactly what this dinner was for. Carol pulled out her phone, said she'd already taken the liberty of calling a doctor friend just to talk, just to be safe, and pressed it into my hand before I could object. A man's voice asked gentle, leading questions. Was I sleeping? Was I confused? Did I feel like myself? The kind of script built to generate exactly the kind of answer that ends up in a file somewhere. I didn't panic, and I didn't perform distress for her either. I set the phone down beside the candles and reached into my bag instead. I pulled out the manila folder and set it next to my plate. Carol, I said, do you know what a notary actually checks for? The table went still. Derek's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Holly looked between her mother and me like she already knew this was bigger than birthday cake. I opened the folder and laid out the spousal consent form, page by page, the signature that wasn't mine, photographs comparing it against 9 years of permits filed with the state. I told them calmly that a forgery challenge had already been filed with the county clerk 3 weeks earlier, that Callaway Structural's ownership documents had been restructured so no one outside myself had signing authority, and that my attorney had a standing instruction to act if I ever went quiet during a family gathering for more than a few hours. Carol's face didn't crumble all at once. It recalibrated, the way it always did when a room stopped responding to her the way she expected. You're confused, she said, her voice dropping into that same gentle register she'd used on the fate doctor's call. This is exactly what I'm worried about. I'm not confused, I said. I'm prepared. There's a difference, and you taught me that, honestly, by giving me a reason to learn it. Holly broke first. She set her napkin down and said, quietly, that she'd known about the form, that Carol had told her it was just a formality for the winery's loan paperwork, and that she hadn't asked enough questions because she'd wanted, for once, to be the daughter Carol was proud of. Derek didn't defend his mother. He didn't defend himself either. He just sat there, staring at his signature with his wife's name on it that his wife hadn't written, finally understanding what he'd let himself become part of. Part 6. The aftermath and lesson. The forgery case moved through the county system within 2 months. Carol's notary contact lost her commission and faced charges of her own. Holly cooperated fully once she understood what she'd actually signed her name to, and her case resolved with probation and restitution rather than anything harsher. Derek and I separated that winter. The divorce was finalized the following spring, and none of it touched Callaway Structural, because none of it had ever legally been allowed to. Lands and cellars went up for sale 18 months later. The debt Carol had hidden from everyone, including her own son, finally caught up with the business the way unpaid taxes always do. I kept the company. I kept my house. I hired 2 more inspectors and took on a state contract I'd been chasing for years. Renee still calls me Sunday mornings, and we talk about anything except notaries and lawyers. When I finally told my mother the whole story on her porch in Tulsa, she didn't ask one question about Derek or Carol. She just rocked her chair and said, "You always did read the fine print, even as a kid." I think about that dinner sometimes, the candles, the fake doctor on the phone, the folder I'd carried in my bag for weeks, like a quiet insurance policy. I think about how close Carol came to convincing a room full of people, including me, that I was the unstable one, simply because she said it with enough warmth and enough confidence. I learned that the people most likely to call themselves family are sometimes the ones keeping the most careful score. And I learned you don't have to raise your voice to win a room. Sometimes you just have to be the only person in it holding actual proof. That's my story. 1 forged signature, 1 folder I almost didn't think to make, and 1 question that ended 30 years of someone getting away with exactly this. If it reminds you to check who has signing authority over anything you've built, take that as your sign to look today.